Welcome to Starbound. My name's Aram, and I'll be your narrator today. Nearly 500 supporters get early access to our stories, including brand new episodes of Sunspire Academy and Freyren and Remike. If you'd like to unlock early access and support new episodes and future series, tap Join below to become a Starbound member. Now, let's get into today's story. The Varen Interspecies Academy for Strategic Studies had the distinct, unchanging smell of an institution that was far too old and far too important to ever be properly renovated. It was a layered aroma, a geological strata of scents built up over millennia. Daniel Danny Choi was oblivious to the olfactory opera. He was slumped in his self-assigned seat in the back row of the Grand Amphitheater, a position he'd staked out on day one with the unerring instinct of a creature seeking high ground. His worn gray hoodie was pulled up over his head, an almost invisible wire snaking from his pocket to his ear, feeding him the frantic three-chord gospel of the Ramones. In his lap, a physical paper notebook, an object of immense curiosity among his peers, lay open. He wasn't taking notes on Valerius's lecture. He was doodling a schematic for a more efficient gray water purifier, a design he'd been mulling over since noticing the Academy's plumbing groaned like a dying beast every morning. A few rows down, the high, singing of diamond-laced alloy on sharpened steel cut through the hall's ambient noise. Rova of the Jotun was engaged in her morning ritual, honing a combat knife the size of a human forearm. Her four powerful rock-skinned arms moved with a steady, deliberate grace, a testament to the unyielding pragmatism forged on a high-gravity world. Closer to the front, Prince Ilarion of the Athelian Ascendancy let out a trill of contemptuous sound, like chimes being deliberately struck out of tune. He paused in the vital task of preening his feathers, which shifted through 1,000 shades of emerald and sapphire under the flat lighting.
Rova, must you? The rasping of your whittling is positively barbaric.
Rova didn't pause her strokes.
My blade is a tool of strategy, Prince. It reminds me that all theories, no matter how elegant, end at a sharp edge. It's as grating, Ilarion continued, his gaze flicking with disdain toward the back of the room, as the presence of that exchange student.
He gestured vaguely at Danny.
Honestly, I still fail to see the point of the First Contact Initiative. What is there to learn from a species that stumbled into the interstellar community smelling of burnt fuel and desperation?
Rova finally stopped, all four of her eyes glancing back at the soft human. She registered the lack of muscle, the ridiculous padded garment, and the perpetually tired eyes.
The soft skin? He's a mascot. Harmless.
Nearby, the internal gel of Glip, a small amoeboid forcid in a hovering containment suit, bubbled with anxiety. Text scrolled across her transparent exterior. Observation. Elevated aggression levels are counterproductive to a learning environment. With a flair of the dramatic that he had cultivated over 2 centuries of teaching, High Strategist Valerius strode onto the stage. A Skarn, Valerius was a magnificent specimen of his kind. 7 feet of polished black exoskeleton, with eyes made of 1,000 black lenses that saw everything in multiple spectra, and a pair of delicate, chittering palps below his mouth that betrayed his every mood. He was a tenured professor in his soul, a creature who loved the substantial weight of knowledge and the sound of his own voice explaining it to lesser minds. He raised 2 of his upper manipulators, and a massive hologram flickered to life above his head. It was a planet, and it was a portrait of cosmic rage. The world roiled with storms the size of continents, their lightning-veined clouds churning a toxic-looking palette of ochre, gray, and bilious green. The land masses were jagged and violent, raw and unfinished, suggesting tectonic fury that never slept. Cadets, Valerius began, his voice a resonant, clicking baritone that filled the hall and commanded attention. Welcome to the final examination of our module on non-viable worlds. Before you is a planet that represents a cosmic failure, a celestial mistake. The Concordance Automated Survey of 4.2 Gamma designated it Terra 9. He let the name hang in the air, a two-word eulogy. It is the only known world to be classified as a Class Omega death world. It is beyond dangerous or hostile. The world is actively, malevolently, lethally anti-life. A murmur went through the room. Even Rova stopped sharpening her knife, her 4 eyes fixed on the hellish sphere. Valerius gestured to the hologram. Our data comes from 3 separate deep-range probes, launched centuries before we even knew a sentient species could arise in that blighted sector. These probes, due to the planet's insane magnetosphere and chaotic gravitational tides, all crash-landed. Their optical sensors were heavily damaged, shattered on impact. But their atmospheric, geological, and biological samplers functioned for decades, drip-feeding a portrait of hell, one agonizingly slow data packet at a time, via a hardened, deep space relay buoy that managed to achieve a stable, high orbit. The hologram flickered, the planetary view replaced by a computer-generated rendering based on telemetry and trace biological markers. A hulking, bear-like creature with claws like scythes appeared, its movements fluid and predatory. Class 12 hyper-predators, Valerius announced, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Bipedal and quadrupedal forms. Analysis of pheromonal markers and soil samples indicates they can smell fear. Not just sense it, cadets. They can chemotactically track the adrenaline and cortisol excreted by terrified prey across miles of dense terrain. Glip's gel inside her suit began to fizz audibly, like a shaken bottle of soda. The image changed again, to a swirling vortex of wind and debris that seemed to snarl. Atmospheric phenomena so violent they can generate their own electrical fields and hunt thermal signatures. We call them thermal phantoms. These are not weather patterns. They are predators made of wind and lightning. Ilarian's feathers ruffled involuntarily. That was unpleasantly chaotic. Technology was meant to control the environment, not be hunted by it. Another shift. A delicate, 3-leafed vine rendered in lush, inviting green. It looked almost peaceful. Neurotoxic flora, Valerius said, his tone grim as a funeral dirge. Contact with the oils on its leaves can induce full-body paralysis in a Jotun in under 3 minutes. Ingestion causes rapid, agonizing cellular dissolution. Rova stared, all her hands clenching into tight fists. She subtly rubbed one of her rocky forearms, an unconscious gesture of revulsion. Valerius paced the stage, a master of his craft, letting the cumulative horror sink in. And then there is the apex, the creature that sits atop this planetary slaughterhouse. Due to the corrupted visual data from the probe's shattered lenses, we have only fleeting, grainy images. The data is fragmented, nightmarish, but the telemetry is undeniable. The acoustic logs are a symphony of aggression. The hologram flickered, struggling to resolve a coherent image from the corrupted data. What appeared was blurred, bulky, vaguely bipedal shape. It moved with a jerky, unnatural speed. It was an indistinct monster from a half-remembered nightmare, a thing of shadow and violence. A primate, Valerius whispered, leaning into his vocal amplifier for maximum effect. Of unparalleled, relentless aggression. The probe data is filled with evidence of this creature slaughtering every other life form, not for sustenance, not for territory, but for what our psych-analysis programs can only classify as ritualistic dominance. Sport. The room was utterly captivated. Cadets from renowned warrior races like the Jotun and the Hyrkanian Scourge looked uneasy. This was beyond war. This was madness. Glip was vibrating at a frequency that threatened to shatter her containment suit. Valerius paused, letting the weight of his final revelation settle. He straightened to his full, imposing height, a black exoskeleton silhouette against the image of a burning world. "This world," he declared, his voice ringing with the finality of a judge passing sentence, "is a lesson in cosmic failure, a testament to the fact that some cradles are, in fact, tombs. It is the definition of uninhabitable. It is a planet so vile, so utterly saturated in death, that the Concordance has placed a level 10 interdiction on the entire system. No one goes in, nothing comes out. It is a closed chapter, a cautionary tale." He basked in the horrified silence of his students. It was one of his favorite lectures, a guaranteed success. A hand went up, slowly, lazily, in the back row. Valerius's thousand-lensed eyes swiveled, the motion sharp and annoyed, focusing on the source. It was Choi, the soft one. He was pulling a small white object out of his ear. Sorry, sir." Danny Choi's voice was quiet, laced with the huskiness of someone who hadn't spoken in a while. Didn't catch that last part." Valerius's palps chittered in irritation. "I was concluding, Cadet Choi. A conclusion it would behoove you to have heard." Danny squinted at the roiling, hellish planet on the hologram. He tilted his head, a gesture of mild curiosity. "Yeah, no, I got the gist. Death, doom, really bad real estate. Got it. It's just that planet." He pointed a thumb at the display. "You're using the old Concordance survey designation, Terra 9. He paused, lowering his hand and looking around at the sea of utterly silent, staring alien faces. He seemed to realize he was the center of attention and looked vaguely uncomfortable, as if he'd accidentally walked into the wrong bathroom. "We just call it Earth," he said, his voice dropping a little, as if sharing a slightly embarrassing secret. He shrugged, a gesture of such casual indifference that it was more shocking than any shout. "Sir, that's my homeworld." The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They landed with the physical, space-bending weight of a collapsing star. For a full 10 seconds, the only event in the entire universe was the silence in that amphitheater. Valerius froze mid-gesture, one of his elegant manipulators held aloft like a statue's. Ilarian's magnificent emerald feathers puffed out in a silent explosion of shock, making him look like a startled, exotic bird who had just witnessed a cardinal sin. Rova's hand, which had just begun to resume its sharpening, stilled so abruptly that the metallic shriek was cut off with an almost comical finality. Glip's anxious bubbling ceased. The gel in her containment suit went perfectly, unnervingly still. The only sound in the crushing emptiness was the tinny, spectral ghost of a guitar riff from Danny's dangling earbud before he belatedly thumbed it off. The academic atmosphere of the room, so carefully cultivated by Valerius, didn't just dissipate. It was crushed, atomized, and scattered underneath the sudden, terrifying mass of a single, reality-bending truth. High strategist Valerius's palps began to click. It was a quiet sound at first, a dry, insectile whisper, but it quickly escalated into a frantic, castanet-like rhythm of pure, unadulterated cognitive dissonance. "Impossible," he stammered, the clicks chopping his words into staccato bursts. "The official record. Your species hails from Epsilon Arandai 2b. It says so on your file. This This must be some kind of clerical error. Yes, that's it. It is the only logical explanation. He was clinging to the idea of a typo like a drowning man to a splinter of wood.
Or a deception.
Ilarion recovered first, his shock curdling into pure aristocratic disdain. He smoothed his ruffled feathers with a flourish of condescending grace.
Is that why your kind is so pathetically fragile you must encase yourselves in padded armor simply to attend a lecture?
He gestured a wingtip contemptuously at Danny's soft gray hoodie. Danny looked down at his chest, then back at Ilarion, his expression one of genuine, unfeigned confusion. This? My hoodie? He plucked at the worn fabric. No, it isn't armor, it's just soft, comfortable. The pockets are great too, see? He stuck a hand in the front pouch. You can hold a data pad, a ration bar, and still have room for your hands. It's economical. The utter mundanity of his answer was somehow more unnerving than a boast would have been. About that file, sir, Danny added, turning back to the sputtering instructor. Yeah, we gave your first contact team the coordinates to a vacation spot, an uninhabited terraforming project in a neighboring system. Seemed safer at the time. You know, first impressions. Didn't want you all showing up with planet crackers because the welcome mat had a few predators on it. Valerius, his professional pride shattered, his entire lecture module revealed as a study of the human homeworld, seized on a way to regain control. Cadet Choi, he boomed, forcing his palps to still. If you possess a counterpoint to concordance-verified, peer-reviewed century-old data, then by all means, the floor is yours. Enlighten us. The invitation was a challenge, a trap laid by a flustered academic desperate to salvage his authority. Danny just shrugged again. Okay. He ambled down the steps from the back row, his gait relaxed, his hands shoved in his pants pockets. The entire amphitheater watched his every move as if he were an unpinned thermal detonator. He stopped at the front, squinting up at the massive, terrifying hologram. Okay, so... yeah, he began, pointing at the hulking, fear-eating monster. That's the Class 12 Hyper-Predator, you said? He tilted his head. We call it a grizzly bear, or a Kodiak, depending on the subspecies. They're big, yeah, and grumpy, especially if you get between a mom and her cubs, but mostly they just want to eat berries and salmon. You just, make a lot of noise, don't look them in the eye, and carry bear spray. It's mostly fine. A ripple of disbelief went through the crowd. Bear spray? A chemical irritant against a Class 12 predator. Danny's finger moved to the swirling sentient storm. The thermal phantom? That's a hurricane, or a typhoon, or a tornado if it's the skinny, angry-looking one. They're not hunting you, they just are. We give them names, like, oh man, Hurricane Brenda is coming ashore. Better board up the windows and get the generator ready. It's just Tuesday in Florida. He then gestured to the image of the delicate three-leafed vine. And the neurotoxic flora? That's poison ivy. Or oak. Or sumac. Yeah, it's super annoying. Gives you a nasty rash for a couple weeks if you're allergic. At the mention of a nasty rash, Ilarion's feathers gave an involuntary, disgusted twitch. You learn to spot it. Leaves of 3, let it be. It's like the first thing they teach you at summer camp. He paused, looking back at Valerius. Is there, like, a summer camp equivalent here, or... Valerius just stared, his jaw, or the Scarn equivalent, hanging agape. Danny turned back to the final terrifying image. The blurred, monstrous primate, the apex killer. He studied it for a moment, a small, wry smile touching his lips. And the apex biped that kills for sport? He let the silence hang for a beat. Yeah, that's us. He nodded slowly. Rova, who had faced down juggernaut brutes in the siege of Thrax and dueled with Hyrcanian assassins in Zero-G, felt a cold knot form in her primary stomach. The quiet human wasn't boasting. He was confessing. "And that's not even our final form," Danny continued. "That looks like a badly rendered image of a hockey goalie. The ritualistic dominance you mentioned? We call it the Stanley Cup playoffs." The casual, matter-of-fact delivery of his corrections was a psychological blitzkrieg. He wasn't posturing, he was giving a nature report on his own home, and in doing so, he was painting a picture of a species so profoundly casually resilient that it turned the galaxy's definition of uninhabitable into a mild inconvenience. The creeping fear in the room became a heavy, living thing.
Instructor!
Ilarian's voice was a shrill shriek, losing all its melodic quality.
This is an outrage, an abomination. This creature is not a student. He is a specimen, a living relic from a world that should have been sterilized. By his own admission, his species are the apex predators of that cosmic slag heap. His presence here is a contamination. He's inherently dangerous.
Valerius, his exoskeletal plates flushed a dark, agitated purple, saw a lifeline. Ilarian was right, but not for the reason he thought. The cadet's absurd claims had undermined the very foundation of the course. Theory, his beautiful, pristine, concordance-approved theory, had been challenged by a sleepy primati in a cloth tunic. There was only one way to settle this. "An excellent point, Prince Ilarian," Valerius said, his showman's voice returning, though now it carried a sharp, defensive edge. "Indeed, theory must be tested. A hypothesis is meaningless without empirical validation." He clapped two of his hands together, and the hologram of Earth vanished, replaced by a grid of tactical data and environmental parameters. "Therefore, we will conduct an immediate field exercise. A simulation, of course. We will use the full data from the crashed probes to construct a perfect one-to-one virtual recreation of the Terra 9 environment." He pointed a long, sharp manipulator at the screen. "The parameters will be simple. A standard 4-member fire team will be dropped into the simulated death world. The objective? Survive for 3 standard galactic hours. Establish a defensible perimeter and secure a water source. Standard hostile environment procedure." His 1,000-lensed eyes swiveled and locked onto Danny. "You, Cadet Choi, will be on this team to provide your unique, on-the-ground perspective." He then scanned the horrified faces of his other students. "I need 3 volunteers to join Cadet Choi in this vital academic pursuit." Silence. No one moved. The most elite scions of the galaxy's greatest powers looked at the simulation parameters and then at the unassuming human, and they saw a connection they did not want to explore. Then, a scraping sound. Rova stood up, cracking the knuckles on her upper and lower hands in a rolling thunder of pops. She stared at Danny, her gaze intense and appraising.
"Fine,"
she grunted, her voice like grinding stones.
"I will go. I wish to see what this common sense looks like under pressure. I will see what the soft skin can do when the simulation bites back."
Ilarian scoffed, but he was trapped. To refuse now, after his outburst, would be a public admission of cowardice. His pride, the bedrock of his entire existence, would not allow it.
"Naturally, I will lead the mission,"
he announced, his voice regaining its haughty chime.
"It is imperative that a refined tactical mind oversee this crude excursion. My ascendant technology will make short work of these simulated boogeymen."
"Excellent," Valerius boomed. And for our communications and data logging officer, his gaze fell upon the trembling, silent form of Glip. Cadet Glip, your skills will be invaluable for recording the data from this historic exercise. A small, terrified string of text appeared on Glip's suit. Requesting a medical exemption? My gel is experiencing spontaneous nucleation due to stress. Nonsense, Valerius declared. It will be a tremendous learning experience. Team selected. He looked at Danny, who had just been watching the proceedings with a placid expression. Cadet Choi, are you prepared? Danny just nodded, giving a small one-shouldered shrug. Cool, he said. When do we start? The prep room for the simulation sphere was a study in contrasts. The air hummed with the charge of weapon capacitors and the low thrum of the sphere's reality engine. Ilarion was being fitted by 2 humming service drones into a state-of-the-art Ascendant Enviro suit. It was a masterpiece of technology, a suit of polished silver and gold with an integrated targeting system, a personal kinetic barrier, and enough atmospheric sensors to analyze a planet down to its component atoms. He selected a plasma rifle that gleamed with deadly elegance, its power core glowing a soft, menacing blue.
This crude simulation will not even scratch my suit's finish, he declared to no one in particular.
Rova, meanwhile, ignored the advanced suits entirely. She trusted her own rock-like hide, which was already resistant to most radiation and extreme temperatures. She systematically checked the loading mechanisms on 4 heavy-duty pulse cannons, strapping 2 to her back and holding the other 2 in her lower set of hands. Her upper hands were reserved for her massive combat knife and a high-frequency vibro axe. She was a walking, 4-limbed arsenal, a monument to the principle of overwhelming firepower. Danny bypassed it all. He glanced at the plasma rifles, the laser carbines, the sonic disruptors, and just shook his head slightly. He walked over to the standard-issue utility kits, the kind of gear most cadets overlooked. He pulled out a compact multi-tool and weighed it in his hand, a flicker of satisfaction on his face. He pocketed it. He found a 50-foot roll of high-tensile synthetic cord and looped it through his belt. He grabbed a single, foil-wrapped ration bar and stuffed it into his cargo pants. The most time he spent on any one task was retying his worn-out combat boots, pulling the laces tight and finishing them with a solid double knot. Ilarion watched him, aghast.
Is that all you're taking, newcomer? A child's toy and a piece of string? You will be dead in minutes.
Danny finished his knot and stood up. Probably, he said, completely deadpan. But my boots won't come off. Glip, already sealed in a reinforced version of her containment suit, floated nervously near the entrance to the Semsphere. Text scrolled across her screen. Hypothetical question. Can a simulation induce a real panic-induced gel decorporealization? Asking for a friend. Rova hefted her cannons. Let's get this over with. The door to the sphere hissed open, revealing a wall of wavering, opaque light. Team, advance into the simulation chamber. Valerius's voice echoed from a speaker. The drop commences in 3, 2, 1. They stepped through. The transition was instantaneous and brutal. One moment they were in a sterile, climate-controlled prep room. The next, they were drowning in a world of green and brown agony. The air was a physical weight, thick with humidity so oppressive it felt like breathing hot soup, leaving a slick, greasy film on skin and exoskeleton alike. The ground was a treacherous stew of mud and tangled roots. The air vibrated with a cacophony of sound, the chittering, buzzing, and screeching of a billion unseen things, a soundtrack composed by Australia's most terrifying insects and amplified through the Amazon's densest jungles. The light was dim, filtered through a canopy of monstrous, dripping leaves, creating a disorienting twilight. A sudden, chilling wind, smelling of pine and cold stone, cut through the tropical heat, a bizarre composite of the Rockies and the Congo.
Report!
Ilarian's voice crackled over the comms, tinny and strained.
My suit's external sensors are fluctuating wildly. The atmospheric composition is illogical.
Suddenly, it began to rain. Not a gentle shower, but a hard, hissing downpour.
Warning. Atmospheric precipitation contains elevated levels of sulfuric and nitric compounds. Acidity level 3.4 pH.
Chimed a calm female voice from inside Ilarian's helmet.
Kinetic barrier integrity at 98%. Acid rain!
Rova snarled, her rocky skin sizzling faintly where the drops landed. She scanned the dark, oppressive jungle, her pulse cannons held at the ready.
Where is the enemy?
A shadow moved in the periphery. Rova whirled and unleashed a volley of searing plasma bolts, blasting a huge, harmless tree fern into steaming pulp. Danny didn't flinch. He just pulled the hood of his hoodie further over his head, letting the fabric absorb the worst of the deluge. He tilted his face up, letting a few drops fall on his tongue, and grimaced. He muttered to himself. Smells like Pittsburgh. While Ilarian's suit fought the environment and Rova shot at ghosts, Danny was already moving. He wasn't marching or running, he was scanning, his eyes darting from the ground to the tree line, assessing. His Death World mindset wasn't a tactical overlay. It was a deeply ingrained instinct. He wasn't looking for enemies. He was looking for high ground, for shelter, for an advantage. He spotted a dark shape 100 yards away, a limestone outcropping, its pale stone streaked with water, a potential cave. He started walking towards it, his boots making squelching sounds in the mud. He didn't shout or give orders, he just acted. Glip, her suit now streaked with acidic grime, wobbled anxiously before her anti-grav unit whirred, and she zipped after the only person who didn't seem to be actively panicking. They huddled in the shallow cave, the limestone of the outcropping hissing as the acid rain streamed over it, neutralizing the worst of its bite. Ilarian stood stiffly, his kinetic barrier shimmering as it deflected the downpour. Rova was methodically wiping down her cannons, growling in frustration.
This is madness,
Ilarian declared.
We are accomplishing nothing. We must advance, find the objective.
Advance where? Danny asked, not looking up. He was crouched by a puddle of runoff collecting at the cave's entrance. Into more of this? We need clean water first. He gestured at the puddle. This stuff will mess you up.
My suit can synthesize water from ambient humidity,
Ilarian sniffed. Great. Can it synthesize enough for all of us before your power cell drains? Danny countered. And can your suit drink it, Rova? Rova grunted a negative, her attention still on her weapons. Danny sighed. He looked out at the simulated jungle. His gaze settled on the local flora. He needed to know if any of it was safe. He didn't have a database. He didn't have a sensor suite. He had an engineering brain and 1,000,000 years of ancestral trial and error encoded in his DNA. He broke off a small branch with a waxy-looking leaf from a bush near the cave mouth. He crept back under and crushed a different, spongier leaf between his fingers. It immediately absorbed the water from his skin. That meant it was porous, likely to soak up the acidic rain and any ground contaminants. He then took one of the waxy leaves and held it out. A drop of rainwater landed on it and beaded up, rolling off cleanly. Good. The waxy surface was hydrophobic. He could use them. He began snapping off more of the waxy-leafed branches. He turned to Glip, who was cowering in a corner, emitting a low, mournful hum. Hey, Glip, You good?
My emotional state is currently analogous to a liquid attempting to exist in a vacuum. The text scrolled.
Right. Okay, can you help me? Danny said, his voice calm. I need you to use your little manipulator arms and arrange these leaves in a channel, right here. He pointed to a dip on the rock floor. Point them downhill. We can catch the clean runoff from the rock face. Glip hesitated. Then her small robotic arms emerged from her suit. She began to clumsily but carefully arrange the leaves as Danny had shown. It was a simple, elegant solution. A small trickle of clear, non-acidic water began to pool at the end of the leafy aqueduct. Rova watched this. Her 4 eyes narrowed.
Your tactics are rudimentary,
she stated. It wasn't an insult. It was an observation. Danny didn't look up from stripping the leaves off a particularly straight, strong-looking branch he'd also salvaged. Yeah, he replied, testing its flex. But they work. Your gun can't shoot the rain. Ilarion scoffed.
A pathetic little stream. My suit could purify the entire puddle in seconds.
And the power drain would make you a glowing target for those thermal phantoms Valerius was so hot on, Danny said absently. Low tech, low signature. Being strong doesn't matter here. Being quiet does. The simple truth of it silenced the prince. The ground began to tremble. A low, guttural growl echoed through the jungle, so powerful it vibrated in their bones. The simulated rain stopped abruptly as it began.
Hostile life form approaching,
Ilarion announced, his plasma rifle snapping up.
Finally, a worthy challenge.
It crashed through the trees, and it was even more ridiculous than the hologram had suggested. The apex biped was a monstrous caricature, a jumble of misinterpreted data. It had the hulking torso of a gorilla, the legs of a sprinting bear, and a head that was vaguely human-like but with glowing red eyes. It was covered in what looked like thick, matted fur and overlapping plates of ossified, keratinous hide that acted as natural armor. It was huge, nonsensically aggressive, and it roared, a sound synthesized from a recording of a garbage disposal and a lion.
For the ascendancy!
Ilarion shouted, firing a brilliant blue bolt of plasma. It struck the creature square in the chest with a spectacular explosion. The monster staggered back, roaring in fury, but its keratinous plates were merely scorched and blackened. Rova stepped forward, a grim smile on her face.
My turn.
She unleashed a torrent of fire from her quad-mounted pulse cannons, the air filled with the percussive thump-thump-thump of the weapons as bolts of pure energy slammed into the biped. The creature bellowed, swatting at the impacts as if they were annoying insects. It charged. With a sweep of one massive arm, it sent Rova flying. She crashed against the rock wall, a sickening crunch. Her pulse cannons clattered to the ground. The monster ignored her, its glowing red eyes fixed on Ilarion. Danny didn't move. He watched. He wasn't watching the monster's weapons or its teeth. He was watching its feet. He saw its predictable, lumbering gait. He saw how its immense weight sunk deep into the muddy ground with every step. And he saw the patch of particularly slick, unstable mud near the edge of a deep, shadowy ravine just to the creature's left. He had the straight branch he'd been working on. He had the roll of synthetic cord from his pocket. In the span of 5 seconds, while Ilarion was screaming and backpedaling, firing wildly, Danny's hands moved in a blur of sure, familiar motion. He used the multi-tool to notch the forked end of the branch. He looped the cord, doubling it for strength. He fashioned a simple, brutally effective slingshot. He picked up a fist-sized rock, its edges sharpened by its journey down the mountain. "Hey, Sparkles!" Danny yelled. Ilarion, startled, glanced at him. "Your rifle! Sonic burst! Aim for the rock wall, over there! He pointed to a spot high above the mudslide, well away from the monster.
Are you insane?
Ilarion shrieked, dodging a clumsy swing from the biped.
Just do it! Distract it!
Desperate, Ilarion complied. He switched his rifle's firing mode and unleashed a high-frequency sonic blast. The sound wave, inaudible to them, slammed into the rock face, shattering loose stones. The monster, its simple predatory brain overloaded by the unexpected sensory input, flinched and turned its head towards the sound. That was the moment. Danny leaned back, pulling the synthetic cord taut. He aimed not for the head, not for the chest, but for the knee. He wasn't trying to kill it. He was thinking like an engineer. He was targeting a structural weak point. He released the cord. The rock flew, a silent, archaic missile in a world of energy weapons. It struck the creature's right knee joint with a wet, solid thwack. It wasn't a killing blow. It wasn't even a crippling one. It was a calculated annoyance. The monster roared in pain and surprise, its leg buckling for just a second. But a second was all it took. Its balance, already compromised on the slick, treacherous mud, was gone. It stumbled, its massive feet slid out from under it. With a final, bewildered roar, the apex biped of Terra 9, the ultimate killer, tumbled sideways and crashed into the simulated ravine, disappearing with a final echoing crash of falling rock and snapping branches. Silence returned. Danny lowered the slingshot. He hadn't outfought the monster. He'd used physics. He'd used gravity. He'd used a tool his ancestors had invented 1,000,000 years ago to hunt rabbits. They emerged from the simulation sphere 20 minutes later, the artificial light of the prep room feeling sterile and wrong. They were battered, filthy, and silent. Ilarion's polished suit was caked in mud and grime, its finish deeply scratched. One of his magnificent tail feathers was bent at a sad, unnatural angle. He didn't speak. He couldn't. Glip's containment suit was covered in a thin film of mud, but her anti-grav unit buzzed with a newfound purpose. She stuck so close to Danny that she was practically a second gelatinous shadow, her occasional bubbles sounding less anxious and more thoughtful. Rova had a massive purple-black bruise forming on her shoulder where she'd hit the rock wall. She walked stiffly over to Danny, her pulse cannons now seeming ridiculously oversized and clumsy in her lower hands. She looked him up and down, from his mud-caked boots to the damp hood of his ridiculously soft sweatshirt. Then she looked at the heavy, advanced pulse cannon in her own hand, then back to him. Her gaze fell on the simple, handmade slingshot he was still holding. She reached out with one of her upper hands, her thick, rocky fingers surprisingly gentle as she touched the synthetic cord. She whispered, her voice a low rumble of awe and dawning comprehension, more to herself than anyone else.
He wasn't trained for that.
Her 4 eyes met his. The blunt, pragmatic warrior who respected only strength and competence saw something far beyond either.
He was born in it.
The respect in her voice was absolute, heavy, and unbreakable as granite. The amphitheater was silent. The other cadets, who had been watching the simulation on the main view screen, gave the returning team a wide, respectful berth. They parted like water around a stone, their eyes fixed not on the proud prince or the mighty warrior, but on the quiet human who was now absently wiping mud off his multi-tool with the hem of his hoodie. High Strategist Valerius stood on the dais, but all the theatricality had been bled out of him. He looked smaller, older. On the holographic screen behind him was the sim data. It was a chaotic mess of red alerts, power spikes, and biostress warnings tracking Ilarion and Rova. And through it all, there were 2 other lines. One was Glips, a frantic, spiky scribble of anxiety that slowly smoothed out and began to mirror the other line. The second line was Danny's. It was a calm, steady, placid blue. A line of startling economy. His energy expenditure was almost nil. His biosigns were elevated, yes, but not in a panic spike. They showed a sustained, low-level hum of heightened awareness, the hum of a creature perfectly at home in hell. "The simulation is concluded," Valerius said, his voice low and hollow. He gestured a weak manipulator at the screen. "The data was correct. The predators, the environment, the hostility. It was all accurate." He turned, his thousand-lensed eyes fixing on Danny. There was no anger in them now, only a deep, unsettling wonder. "What the data failed to convey, what it could never convey, was you." He took a step forward. "Your species. You evolved in this. You never left the death world. You just built your houses on top of it. You carry it inside you. It's in your bones, in your blood. You've never left the death world mindset." Danny finally looked up. He'd managed to get the foil open on the ration bar from the sim and took a bite. He chewed thoughtfully for a moment, then swallowed. "We didn't get a choice," he said, his voice quiet but carrying in the profound silence. "You can't leave it behind. It's why we look so tired all the time, I guess. It's a full-time job just being aware." He looked around at the alien faces, seeing their confusion. "The weather report is a threat assessment. A dark alley is a tactical problem. That funny noise from the car is a potential survival scenario." He absent-mindedly wiped a smear of sim mud from his multi-tool onto his pants, leaving a dark streak on the worn cargo fabric. "You can call it a death world mindset," he said, taking another bite of the bar. "We call it getting through the week." He met Valerius's gaze. "We just learned to live so loud, to build our music and our cities and our arguments so loud we couldn't hear the monsters anymore. But they're always there, under the floorboards, in the dark woods at the edge of town, in the fine print of a contract." The class was dismissed. No one moved until Danny started walking towards the exit. He walked up the steps, his gait still relaxed, still unassuming. He reached the main door and paused, his hand on the activation panel. He turned back, looking over the room of silent, staring aliens. The best, the brightest, the strongest the galaxy had to offer. He wasn't being theatrical. He wasn't being threatening. He just looked weary, like a man trying to explain something fundamental and sad to a child who couldn't possibly understand. "You all study death worlds like they're a puzzle to be solved from the outside," he said, his voice carrying a strange note of empathy. "A problem to be analyzed, contained, and filed away." He ran a hand through his damp hair, a gesture of profound exhaustion. "We study them like we're still trapped inside, fumbling in the dark, trying to find the key for the next lock before the thing in the room with us figures out we're there." He gave them a small, tired smile that didn't come close to reaching his eyes. It was a smile that held 9 billion ghost stories. "You've seen a simulation of my home. You've fought one caricature of one monster. Now imagine what happens when 9 billion of us finally get off that rock for good and bring all our ghosts with us." He turned and walked out. The door slid shut with a soft hiss, leaving the most promising military minds in the galaxy wrapped in a silence more profound, more complete, and more terrifying than any lecture on war they had ever received. A moment later, the door hissed again, just a crack. Glip's little containment suit zipped out, hurrying to catch up with the human. As she floated down the empty corridor after him, her external translator emitted a new, tentative query, a flicker of normalcy in the face of a new and terrible cosmic dread. Query: what is the recommended reading material for getting through the week?